The meeting is now live.
Probably saying, are you here, John?
Hey, John, as veteran member, did you want to facilitate?
Sure, no problem. And thank you for the email. I can never hit the link and make it work. I always have to put in the ID number, which slows things down a little bit. So I will call this meeting of the Long-Term Financial Policy and Audit Subcommittee to order. And Madam Secretary, could you indicate how individuals can participate during public comment?
At each agenda item, the item is presented. The chair will ask for subcommittee members' comments and then open it up for public comment. The host in Zoom will be lowering all hands until public comment is open for the agenda item. Once the chair has called for public comment, the chair will announce for the public to raise their hand if they wish to speak on the specific agenda item. If you are calling in to listen to the meeting audibly, you can dial 9 to raise your hand. The host will then call on the public who have raised their hands. Public comment will be limited to 3 minutes and a timer will appear on the screen for the subcommittee members and public to see. Once all live public comments have been heard, the meeting host will read emails submitted. If you provide a live public comment on an agenda item, but also submitted an email, your email comment will not be read during the meeting. Additionally, there is one public comment period on today's agenda to speak on non-agenda matters, which is item 2. This is the time when any person may address the subcommittee on matters not listed on this agenda. And also, we need to do the roll call.
Yes, thank you, Madam Secretary. I appreciate that.
Chair Rogers, Member Schwedhelm,
Here.
Member Sawyer.
Here.
Let the order reflect that all subcommittee members are present with the exception of Chair Rogers.
Thank you very much. And at this point, we will take public comment on items not on the agenda. Do we have any hands raised or any other request to comment?
We received no emails and I see no hands raised.
Thank you very much. Then we'll continue on to item 3, which is the approval of minutes. Any changes to the minutes that you noticed, council member?
Look good to me.
All right, they did to me as well. Thank you. So then we will move on to item 4.1. Our Chief Financial Officer, Ellen Alter, can you introduce the item, please?
Sure. This item is our our general fund budget performance update through the third quarter. And Veronica Connor, who is our budget and financial analysis manager, is going to run through the slides.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Alan. Yes, my name is Veronica Connor. I'm the budget and financial analysis manager. And I know I might be a new face at this subcommittee meeting, but I assure you I've been watching many of them and I've helped Alan out with these quarterly updates in the past. So I will be running through these numbers with you today. Next slide, please.
And welcome aboard.
Thank you very much. So we're going to take a look at our third quarter general fund revenues and our third quarter general fund expenditures. We will put those together and try to see where we might land at June 30th, 2022 in the general fund. At that point, I will turn it over to Alan and he's going to give you an update on our parking enterprise fund and we'll be happy to answer any questions. And next slide. And next slide, please. So to start out with our adopted budget of revenues in the general fund, we've shown you this pie chart before, and I always like to start the presentation out with this just to kind of give a visual reminder that when we're talking about general fund revenues, it's really sales tax and property taxes. Those are the big chunks that we're looking at. So we like to pay the most attention to those. It's 53% of our overall adopted budget. And when we try to see where we're going to land for year end, it really is contingent on the performance of these two large categories. So when we came and talked to you back at second quarter, we were recommending to appropriate additional revenue, which we did at council back in February. So when this adopted budget was put together, it was last spring. It was in the height of the pandemic. There was a lot of uncertainty and our numbers were just far too conservative. So back in February, as you probably recall, we appropriated an additional $6 million in sales tax, an additional $1.5 million in property tax, and $2 million in RPTT. And next slide, please.
Veronica, could you do me a favor and go
Yeah.
back to the pie chart just for a moment and
Sure.
explain because the other taxes are higher than the property taxes. Could you explain the other taxes for those that might be watching?
Sure. So other taxes is primarily the biggest chunk in there is the VLF swap, and that comes with our property taxes. That also contains our cannabis business tax and our transient occupancy tax. And then there's a bunch of other smaller objects in there.
Great. Thank you very much.
Sure. Okay. So this is our year-to-date performance as of March 31st, 2022. So that first column there, operating revenues, this shows all of those major revenue categories that we just saw on the pie chart on the previous slide. The second column, our adopted budget, this is what we adopted, about $178 million back in June. And then the mid-year changes. The first one, property taxes, as I mentioned, we appropriated additional revenue because we found our adopted budget was just far too conservative. Same with sales taxes. We appropriated an additional $6 million. And other taxes, that $2 million was RPTT. So charges for services, you'll notice a reduction of revenue there. That took place because our water billing function that is we used to be in the finance department. We moved over to water mid-year. So we used to have that operate within the general fund, and we actually collected revenue from the water department into the general fund to pay for it. But when we moved that out to the enterprise fund, we also had to then reduce our revenue as well. So although we have a reduction in revenue, there was also a reduction in expenditures. So it was a net zero to the general fund. The final budget, moving over to the right, is just the sum of those first two columns. So that totals up to be about $186 million is what we are hoping to collect by year end. And then in year-to-date actuals, that shows where we are as of March 31st, 2022. So that bottom line, which shows that we're at about 65.68%, while some might expect that to be closer to 75%, looking at 3 quarters in, we obviously have some timing considerations. So we'll kind of talk through those as we go. So property taxes are top line at 55%. This one we've discussed before. We get a big installment in December and another installment in April. So as of March 31st, it's right where we expect it to be at 55%. And we have seen our amount come in for April, and we do get one smaller extra piece in June, an accrual that occurs at year end, and we are expecting to be right at about 100% of our budget, just no more, no less. Sales taxes at 60.77%. This is also collected on a 2-month lag, so we don't expect this to be quite at 75%. There will be an accrual at year end. And also projecting out where we're going to be, this one is also trending right about exactly where we think it is. That $6 million mid-year change turned out to be just about exactly what we needed to really meet our target. UUT is right on trend. Other taxes, even though that one looks low, it's actually coming in a bit high. We collect the VLF swap and the same timing as our property taxes. So we're going to get a big significant amount in April. So in other taxes, we also have cannabis industry taxes I mentioned, and that one's coming in a little low. So that one's been sort of up and down over the years, and we don't think we're going to hit our mark on that one. But we also have TOT, which is coming in high thanks to the short-term rental fee that we've been seeing in the last few months. That one is going to offset any losses in cannabis industry tax. So as a whole, we do expect that other taxes category to exceed budget by the end of the year. Moving down to licenses and permits. This one has obviously already exceeded budget. This is your building permit fees and encroachment permit fees, which are coming in pretty high. So we obviously will be seeing more of these in the coming months. And same with charges for services. This one's coming in high as well, thanks to We have building plan review fees and planning permit fees and engineering fees. So it's really those PED revenues that are driving those two categories and bringing in our revenues above budget. Intergovernmental is at 91%, but we don't expect that to exceed budget. That's a timing thing where we get payments early on in the year for our Roseland payments, and pavement maintenance is the other one. So then fines and forfeitures is one that we expect will not actually hit our budgeted amount. This is mostly parking violation revenue, and we don't see that quite being what we were hoping it to be. So we might come up a few $100,000 short in that one. And then finally, transfers in. These are predictable amounts that we know. We expect to see 100% of these by the end of the year. No more, no less. So let's go to the next slide, please. So this kind of summarizes the projections of what we were just discussing. So property tax, sales tax, and UUT, we don't expect to be over or under budget, just right about on target. Other taxes, we think we're going to come in just a little bit ahead of budget thanks to TOT coming in high, but cannabis coming in low. Licenses and permits and charges for services are mainly driven by PED revenues, which are going to be exceeding budget. And then finally, fines and forfeitures is going to be coming in low. So overall, we're looking at about $2.6 million ahead of budget for our year-end projection. And yeah, sorry, you're muted.
Muted, sorry. I'm going to interrupt you just for a second. Mr. Schwedhelm, if you have any questions as we go along, I'm a big fan of doing it as we go, given the nature of this information gathering. So if you see something that you want to question on any one of these slides, just jump to it.
Good timing, John. Thank you, Veronica, for this information. So we had been talking about, and I know this is only third quarter, but let's say this is fourth quarter and we have that number. So would that 2.6 million be then up to council? Where do we want to distribute that extra revenue, into which bucket, whether it's pay down our PERS unfunded liability? We talked about infrastructure, we talked about vehicles. Is this the figure that, if again, it was fourth quarter, we'd be discussing?
Unfortunately, no. So this shows us coming in ahead of budget for revenue. We'll put this together with expenditures and a few slides ahead of the game. So we did, even with revenue budgets being what they are, we did pass a deficit. So, we're looking better than a deficit, but we aren't quite $2.5 million in the black yet. So that's
okay,
just one half of the equation. But yeah, we'll see that in a couple coming slides.
I'm taking the rosy half, optimistic half. Thanks.
Thanks, Tom.
But are there any other questions on revenue before we move into expenditures?
I think we're good.
Okay, good. So we'll go next slide, and next slide, please. So general fund expenditures, another pie chart to give you a visual. The general fund, as we know, is very people heavy. We have police, we have fire, we have administration. So this pie chart shows that blue wedge and the orange wedge are all salaries and benefits. They equal about 79% of our total general fund budget. Services and supplies, this covers anything from overhead to professional services, which is about 38.7 million. And then we have a tiny little sliver of capital outlay that we adopt with our annual budget. So when we talk about an annual budget and we are looking at our year-to-date spending, it kind of varies for how we approach services and supplies and salaries and benefits. As you know, we adopt a budget in June and we start spending our expenditures in July, and we want to get as close to our adopted expenditures as we can without exceeding them. If we exceed budget, we have to come back to council and appropriate more, which we don't want to do. So by design, this adopted budget will have turn back. It's just how it works. Services and supplies, if we were to show you year-to-date spending, it doesn't mean a whole lot at this point because we know that come June, departments will do everything they can to spend what they have. They will encumber, they will, go out and buy what they can, they will roll contracts over. So what we do is we assume that at year end, about 98% of all those services and supplies and capital outlay will be expended. Salaries and benefits, which are obviously the majority of the general fund budget here, are a little more easy to predict because we have a payroll schedule. And since that's the largest chunk of what we're looking at, we can dive into that a little deeper. So we could move the next slide, please. So salaries and benefits for fiscal year 21-22. We did come and appropriate an additional 7.7 million in salaries and benefits back in February, and that was due to our labor negotiations. There was a signing bonus and there were COLAs. And we also appropriated about $1.5 million for fire's overtime budget, which we felt was grossly unbudgeted. So when we consider that, there is actually still one more cost of living increase that has to take place towards the end of the year. So as of March 31st, we have not even seen all of our cost of living adjustments. There was one more that was going to take place in April. So we had to factor that into our projections of where we think salaries and benefits may land. So the other final consideration is that we do budget a vacancy credit. When we do our budgeting, we budget every position for their full salaries and full benefits, but we know it's impossible to have every position always filled. So we've always put about 1.5 million of a negative amount in our budget to offset those or to account for those vacancies. This year, we know that that's not enough. Recruitments and hiring has been a very challenging thing for all departments across the board. So we just know that we're going to see more turn back than 1.5 million for vacancies. So,
Veronica, on those positions, do you do it at top step or entry level step?
So when we budget positions, anything that is filled, we budget it at what they are, what level they're at. Plus there's a step built in for if they're due for a merit increase or if they're due for a cost of living increase. So it's pretty accurate. For anything that's vacant, we budget, I believe if it's a range position, but it doesn't have actual steps, we budget it at the low range, assuming that if we were to bring someone in, they'd be at the low end. But if it's a step position, we do it at the mid step.
Great, thank you.
Veronica, could you go back to the prior slide just for a second?
Yeah.
If you could for me. So on the services and supplies, you know, what you mentioned was there tends to be near the end of the budget period, a fair amount of purchasing, et cetera, for these services and supplies. You know, so that the community understands that this is not just wasteful spending. Could you explain how how the departments decide on how to expend the unused budget near the end of the year?
Sure. So if we're approaching the end of the year, for example, in our budget season right now, we're constantly hearing from departments things they need, that if it's anything that's one time in nature, we encourage them to look at their service and supplies budget for the current year and estimate, are you going to have unspent appropriations? Try to purchase it now. Anything that you might need for the next fiscal year, anything that maybe you needed for this year, but you couldn't get to. It's certainly not just spending with, just spending just to spend, but
Right.
Yeah, they are looking at things to encumber that they can put into contract, or professional services are really one of the larger items, professional and outside services that have contracts in place that if we budget a certain amount in this year and we need them to encumber that amount before the year rolls over. So a lot of that goes into contracts.
I appreciate that. It's almost kind of a cleanup of expenses near the end of the year. And it's important for the community to know that, because there are those that feel that budgets just get used up because they need to be used up. And in our case, we try to be very, very careful in those expenditures and make sure that they are reasonable and affordable. And so that's why I asked the question. I appreciate the clarification.
And I know some organizations operate on a system where your budget one year equals what you spent the previous year. We don't do that. So it's not the type of thing where spend to inflate your budget so that we can match it for the next year. Right. It's just, you will get the same amount, but we do look back to see what's reasonable for sure.
I appreciate that. Thank you. So we're on slide 10.
Yeah, we can move on to the next slide. Thank you. So this is projecting out our salary and benefits expenditures for the rest of the year. The blue wedge shows our year-to-date expenditures of 105 million. The orange wedge shows what we expect is going to be spent in Q4 of about 38 million. And then we think we're going to come in under budget at about 4.3 million by the end of the year. And this will be our salaries and benefits turn back. So what might affect this would be any retirements. Sometimes we have retirements within the general fund that have significant payouts of vacation time if we have somebody that's been with the city for years and years. If recruitments were suddenly to take a great turn and all of our vacancies were filled, that might eat into this turn back a bit as well. And then finally, towards the end of the year, we do see what we call salary savings budget revisions. This is at the city manager's discretion, and we don't see a lot of it, but sometimes if a department has salary and benefits turned back, they might ask the city manager for permission to use some of these unspent appropriations to hire a contractor to do this role if they're having difficulty recruiting, or to put those expenditures towards recruitment or advertising to fill that position. So that's something else that might affect this $4.3 million figure. But I mean, at the end of the day, all things considered, that $4.3 million figure is not going to differ wildly. It's not going to be half that. It's not going to be double that. It's going to be somewhere in that ballpark. And we go to the next slide. So putting everything together for a year-end projection for June 30th, 2022, we're looking at recurring revenues and transfers in of about 188 million. Our operating expenditures and transfers out of about 187 million. And we're looking at a total surplus of about 750,000. So this isn't huge, but considering that we passed an operating deficit of about $8 million, we're doing pretty good. So it's a better view. So we do expect, as we discussed before, to hit 100% of transfers in and transfers out. Revenues are coming in ahead of schedule, which is closing that deficit. Expenditures, we're turning back more salaries and benefits than anticipated. So that's helping that deficit out as well. And that's it for my third quarter update. So if anyone else has any questions, I'm happy to answer it before I turn it over to Alan to talk about parking.
Thanks, Veronica. Tom, any questions at this point?
Yeah, I do have one. I know talking about the recruitment challenge, and I'm seeing what is going on in a variety of different job functions where they're actually doing sign-on bonuses and things like that. If the city were to go into that direction to try to recruit additional staff, does that require council feedback or interaction, or is that at a staff level decision?
I believe as long as we would have the budget for it, it would be a staff level decision. If we obviously we have unspent appropriations and salaries and benefits, so that would be a totally appropriate use to be able to say we didn't spend X amount during the year. Can we use this as a signing bonus? If it becomes something that's more structured into our annual budget going forward, we would definitely need to take that into consideration with building our annual budget, and that would be something council would be a part of.
Yeah, and that's what I would hope, that the staff are the ones closest to this, and there are some positions, and I just know from a police department perspective, where they used to attract 500 applicants. I think this last one, they got 88, and it's like, and if other agencies are doing that, I'm guessing departments are looking at other strategies to try to fill some of those vacancies.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you for that.
Yeah, no problem.
Thanks, Veronica. Good presentation. I'm going to move to public comment. So, Madam Secretary, do you need to reiterate the instructions for the community if they want to weigh in on 4.1?
Hey, John, we may want to wait until, I think we have like 2 or 3 more slides just on the parking side.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And we can catch all those, and that way we can have comments for all of them.
Okay, sounds good. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Let's see here. So what I wanted to do is, what I wanted to do is to provide just a quick update through the third quarter of where we are with the parking enterprise. This is something that we're challenged there right now, in that we have had lower revenues. We've, over the last couple of years, as a result of not only COVID impacting the fund itself, with less people in the downtown parking, so less revenue coming in. We've also, we were trying to help out the businesses in the downtown by waiving a number of fees. So over the last, definitely last year and into this year, we are running deficits that has an impact on the fund. So what I wanted to do was to give an overview here. This will also be part of the discussion we'll have on in May 10th at the budget study session. As parking is a part of finance, I'll be talking about this then. So I wanted to give an update here to this committee as prior to that. So next slide, please. So just hitting right into the nitty gritty here. This is the fund forecast that we've started developing for this, and I'll give you. It's very high level, but I'll talk about some of the assumptions that we have. So the first two columns, this is the current year adopted budget and then the proposed budget for fiscal year 22-23. As you can see, in both years, we are running a deficit. And then going into the forecast years, I should take a step back. So this is the operating revenues that we have in there include the fee waivers that we have in place. So at least for fiscal year 21-22. However, for 22-23, we are the fee waivers go away at the end of June. We are not proposing to extend those. So we've built back in some of the revenue that we know we can count on coming back, and that typically has to do with garage revenue, attended garage. So basically pulling the parking tickets or to go into the garages. One of the things that we are doing though is we are working with the DAO, and they have mentioned that ways that we can try to encourage more parking for the garages. And one of the ways that we could do that would be to be consistent through all of our different garages, especially as it relates to the first hour free. So right now, 2 of our garages offer first hour free, and that was pre-COVID. So going post-COVID, what we are proposing to do is to have all of our garages first hour free. That will provide the businesses and the DAO themselves some consistency and permanence so that they can have that as a part of their advertising and bringing people in. Here are some places to park. There's first hour free. Our hope is that while that hurts us a little bit in revenue, hopefully we'll be able to get more revenue as a result of it. And right now at this point, we want to try whatever we can in order to help the businesses downtown, but also to hopefully spur parking usage and generate that revenue. The $200,000 of non-operating revenue, that is made up of interest, and because it's an enterprise fund, the investment of that fund is within there. It's part of our overall portfolio, but there is allocated revenue that comes from interest and gain and loss on investments. That amount wildly goes up and down from year to year. It's very difficult to predict. It's not something that I would use as a basis on which to build a budget. However, it is revenue that comes in, and based off of past revenue amounts from that, $200,000 seems to be a reasonable plug to have in there. So that's just plugged throughout the forecast. And then our transfers in, this is really the money that's coming in from the general fund that helps pay for the parking enforcement operation. And on the general fund actually receives all of the parking fine revenue, but in turn it pays the parking fund to actually do that enforcement. For operating expenditures, this is salary, benefits, and services and supplies. The increase from fiscal year 21-22 to 22-23 is largely a result of the MOU increases that were passed. So it's so that's what those are. Our transfers out is for, that's largely to go to the DAO as part of the parking part of that business assessment district. So with that, if you add all those up, we get to a deficit, and then below the line, I put our projects, which are both our O&M and CIP projects. They're really, there's not a lot of distinction between the two. Those projects are mainly to do maintenance on our garages, lots, parking meters, to that. We do have a asset management plan. We try to budget for that when available, and that is what you're seeing there. So this is it's pursuant to that plan, and then whatever the updated numbers are for that, and then I'll talk a little bit more about that going forward and where we are from strategy standpoint. So we are anticipating ending the year fiscal year 22 at $5.9 million of reserves, and then drawing down on those reserves again for the 22-23 budget. Going into the forecast, the $4.8 million of revenue, what I did was I went back to 5 years of pre-COVID revenue, took an average of that. We've done a lot of different things over that time. In some years, we expanded our parking hours, we reduced those, we've kind of done a number of different things. So I just basically took an average and sort of took away the high ends and the low ends, and it gives us looking for a target from which we can hopefully gauge where we need to be in order to be able to operate in the fund. Again, we have the same plug for the non-recurring revenue, and then the transfers in. And the transfers in, because they are tied to staff largely, I put the same benefit and salary assumptions that we would have for our operating expenses into that, because I figure it's about a 1-for-1. So I wanted to make sure that I covered that in that. For operating expenditures, we do know that there's going to be a COLA increase in fiscal year 23-24. So that's included in there. Plus we have increases for PERS and other benefit costs that are put in there, and these mirror what our long-range financial forecasts that we're doing for the general fund. So what I tried to do was take what we're doing for the general fund and mirror that for this, because the overlying assumptions are the same, especially for the known costs that we have. And so those costs are escalated as we go through the forecast. Transfers out, I left that constant. I figure that it's going to be around 120, 121,000. That's about what it's been in the past to send money to the DAO. So I figure that's a pretty constant. And what we get is we were able to operate from just a pure operating standpoint for a few years, assuming that we are meeting our the revenue amounts, and we could continue to go, but it does go on a downhill basis. So we're really looking at that 25, 26 year where we get pretty close to the bottom. And in terms of projects, what we're doing now at the staff level is to try to identify within our asset management plan what we can push off, or really what's critical. If we have to do something right now, then we can do it, but what it's going to do is going to impact our bottom line of our reserves. So ideally, I think from 23, 24 and going on, while I'm showing project amounts here, most likely what I'm going to need to do is push off anything non-essential to out years. And in order to maintain reserves, because we're at the point where our reserves are just going off a cliff and I can't afford to do projects. So it will also probably require us to go out and do some structural analyses of our, especially of our garages, to make sure that we aren't deferring anything that is more of a health safety issue. We want to make sure that those we do and we find money to do that. But overall, what we have, and I'm not really, we're still trying to formulate at the staff level where we go with this, because we're headed in a bad area. We're hoping that revenues will go up to a point where it not only supports operations, but also supports doing projects. I am looking at the potential of financing projects to, preserve cash and be able to get our projects done if we can afford to do that. We'll have to look at creative ways of coming up to adding new revenue there. These are all things that we're looking at in order to try to maintain the operation. And then I assume at some point we'll come back to the council, or probably this committee as well, before going to council, and talk about really what our long-term strategic options are for the enterprise. But right now, we've taken a hit over the last couple of years in reserves. We're hoping that with things opening back up, that revenues will come back. But I'm really worried that even if they come back to average, that it's not enough to sustain operations in the long term without either increasing revenues or decreasing expenditures, or a combination of the two. Next slide, please.
Alan, before we go to the next one, I just had a quick question.
Sure.
The transfers out, you said, to the DAO.
Yeah.
Is that different than the funding that I believe the city provides to the chamber for managing events in the square? What's that 121K go? Another way of asking it.
So there is, I think there's a couple of different things in play. There is some stuff that goes to the chamber, but there's a benefit district that the downtown's a part of. The general fund does pay money into that. This is specifically the parking fund's contribution to that, and it goes for, I do think that it does pay for some of the things going on in the stairs, but in the square, but it's also for general beautification, and there's maintenance work that's done in there, and so it's all that. But what you're seeing is the specific bill that is tied to parking because of our presence in the downtown.
Great, thanks for that clarification.
Alan, before you go to the next slide, I'm curious, this is maybe slightly off point, but are we well promoting the 1 hour free, or do you have, because as far as I know, you have to get right up to the ticket spitter, and then it tells you that you're going to have 1 hour free. I may be totally off base with that. That may just be a memory that I have, but if we're going to be offering it, and we could use, if it just takes a fair amount of some paint in a fairly high point size, saying 1 hour free. Now, admittedly, it goes against the generation of resources. But if we're going to offer it, we should promote it. So I'm wondering if, to your knowledge, is that in the plan?
So it will be in the plan, and we have talked with Cadence at the DAO about specifically that. And so what we've committed to is to working with them to try to figure out ways to not only better promote the parking that's there, and some of this doing 1 hour free would be part of that. But also to anything else that we can do relative, not only the businesses and the events, but also the parking options that are there. So I imagine that we'll be working with Raisa on that as well. And but definitely we both Chad Hedwig, who's the new Chad Head, excuse me, who's the new parking manager. We both met with Cadence and committed that our working with them to try to find creative solutions to make all of this work together. And so that's kind of where we are. And we talked specifically about advertising. So we are working on that.
I appreciate that. And that's good news. Thank you.
You're welcome. So yeah, next slide, please. So this just kind of tells you where we are with the reserves. You saw that on the forecast slide, but this just gives your standard thing. I do want to point out one item. So there was the sale of lot 2, which is about $1.3 million, which ordinarily would go into the reserves, and it is in there right now. We have received those funds and they are in the reserves. However, I think, and I apologize, but I need to work a little closer with our attorney's office on exactly how that sale agreement was structured, and that there may be something that triggers us to need to use that money toward that lot should something happen there in the future. So what I'm looking to do is kind of pulling that aside. That's money in there, and hopefully that ends up being a part of our reserves, but I can't spend it. So I think I need to assign it in there just in case something gets triggered later where I need to do that toward lot 2. But those are things that I need to iron out with the attorney's office of exactly what our liability is with that.
Could you remind me what lot 2 is? Is that little one off of E Street?
It's the one that's right across from Macy's. As I point, and you don't know where I'm pointing, but it's over right across from the mall. It is a small kind of thing there, but I think it's yeah, just right across from Macy's in the mall. That's how I best know it.
Okay, I was just curious because I don't know them by number. I know them by street.
Yeah, and I think I have the wrong. I can't even recall the street that's up against that. So I apologize.
Not a problem. I'm sure I've seen it. Thank you.
And
are you talking the Ross Street lot, Alan?
I think, yeah, that's it, Ross.
Oh, okay.
I didn't have
There
the
you go.
confidence to pull the trigger on that one.
I'm here to help.
Yeah, I wasn't finding it. So yeah, I appreciate that. Thanks, Tom.
And before we go to public comment, there is one thing I do want to kind of add on to what Veronica talked about, and Tom, your question about the year end and what surplus. So yes, anything that we would have in the general fund that in that surplus mode, that's those are true one-time items that could be used for true one-time projects. We will know that more toward the end of September, October. So the idea is that's when we would come back and say, here's the amount that we have to work with, and whether it goes into buckets or whether it goes into a specific thing. And I can talk a little bit more about the bucket issue on the next agenda item, but that's kind of the rough timeline of where we are with that.
Okay, and just with that, and I know it's not on the agenda, but do we have the 115 trust, or we still need to get
I'm going to
direction?
talk about it right after this.
Okay, thanks.
So with that, if you have any other questions, that ends our tag team report.
Thanks, Alan. So if I'm not seeing any other questions popping up with the those on the screen. Madam Secretary, do we have any comments from the public on this item?
No emails were received.
Thank you very much. And no raised hands.
There are no raised hands.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll just go ahead and move on then, Alan. And just for a little housekeeping, I have a hard stop pretty much at 5:45. So
You're gonna absolutely meet that.
excellent. Thank you very much. Just wanted to give you a heads up. Thank you.
Yeah. So the next item on the agenda is an update on where we are with the fiscal policies. So on May 10th, we will have an item at council to adopt the Section 115 trust and include initial deposits into that trust. And what I can give you at a very high level, so we're looking at, we're actually going to do 2 trust accounts. So one for the city general fund pension and one for Santa Rosa water pension costs. So we talked with them. We gave an overview to the BPU's budget subcommittee or budget, the full BPU and study session. So they're aware of moving forward. We plan on doing an initial deposit of $10 million of the fiscal stability general fund funds held in reserve. And then water is doing 4.4 million out of their reserves. That'll go in beginning in fiscal year 24-25. We will, our existing pension obligation bonds will be retired. And so we are gonna redirect the funds that we would spend annually toward that debt service to contribute to the fund. So what that means is that on the general fund side, it's about $2.6 million. On the water fund side, I think it's about 700,000. So what you will have in doing that is that we'll have an initial deposit and then an ongoing contribution with absolutely no increase to the budget. And you'll be able to start building the funds up there. We believe that by going at that clip, probably around 10 years, we should hit our goal of on the general fund side of about $34 million, which is a right now a high year payment of not only our UAL but also our normal cost. So that's the total PERS thing there. So that was our initial goal, is to hit that. And then based on the analysis that we've done, that right around that same time period, we're going to be inching pretty close to 100% funded status. That'll be looking at, we'll have to do an actuarial evaluation of the Section 115, but with that in conjunction with our normal CalPERS account, we should be very close, if not at that 100% funded. So we're getting, that was our next goal. And then the idea is to continue through that process, to continue funding it, and to get to where that actually becomes a true pension stabilization fund that will allow us to see increases going out in the future, to be able to use those resources to pay CalPERS and not adversely affect the general fund. And the same would be the case with water. and we'll just continue chipping away at that UAL. And there we go. So that's coming, that's exciting. That'll be there on May 10th as a report item. We'll go there, and we'll also have somebody from PFM who's going to be running the trust. They will be there in case council has any questions from that. The next thing that we talked about was the capital replacement items, and specifically as they related to the fire department, because that was the largest chunk that we had to deal with. The majority of in fact, none of the fire vehicles, the large apparatus that they had was in the capital replacement fund. So we have figured out a way budgetarily to handle that. So again, we do need to use some of the fiscal stability funds, about $3.3 million. And we'll have to have an item. I think Veronica and I are still talking on whether we can have that as called out separately, but as part of the budget item going on June 21st, or if I need to do a specific standalone staff report for that. But the idea would be is that we will, that catches up the fire department within the equipment replacement fund. And then beginning in 23-24, there'll be a part of that fund, just like every other department that has equipment there. It will mean about a little over $1 million of additional annual expense in the general fund as that, but that is part of our long range forecast as we're going there. So we've already included that as part of it. And the nice thing about that is that it means that that those two items we can handle budgetarily and not have to use the buckets of surplus funds. And what's good about that is because the third item that we talked about was deferred maintenance, and whether that is infrastructure for facilities or infrastructure in the public. And that is going to be a big nut to crack, to be perfectly honest. So to be able to, and I know that I had talked about getting policies for all three of those things going and in place by June 30th. I am going to need to push that one off into the summer as we start going through and evaluating what should be funded and prioritizing them from a health and safety standpoint to a critical need of a facility, such as a crack down the middle of the public safety building or HVAC system replacement, roofs, all of that. It's becoming a more daunting task than what I originally envisioned. And we just simply at the staff level need more time to be able to go through that evaluation process and find that. At the same time, just as I'm working with our municipal advisors on what we can possibly do with infrastructure funding relative to the parking district and that, we're also looking at what we can do in terms of infrastructure projects in general, and how we can preserve cash by issuing debt. We have a very clean debt sheet as it relates to especially the general fund, and this may be the opportunity for us to be able to do that. We know that we have a fire station we need to build down as we relocate Station 8. We have those types of projects that were out there, and we need to figure out ways to fund those and move those forward while preserving cash. So, and I think the two of those things they're gonna intersect in some areas. So we need a little bit more time to figure out where they do intersect and what makes sense to more cash fund. And so that's where we are with all those programs.
Tom, any questions?
Hey, question is just, thank you, Alan. This is music to my ears. You know, I like that we've identified a path moving forward to righten our financial ship. So thank you so much for all your efforts on that. I'm really appreciative.
You're welcome.
Took the words right out of my mouth. I just, at every opportunity into the future, when identifying these strategies to future councils, it's going to be really important to reiterate on as often as necessary to make them understand the importance of following the strategies, because they will pay off in the long run, and those obligations that we are under now will ultimately, if they hold strong to the strategies, will fall away. And it's just really I'm so pleased to see these strategies, even though that you're not complete with your infrastructure, that is a major piece of work, and I understand that, and as does Tom and the rest of the council, I'm sure, as well. So, keep up the good work. I just really love seeing it in print. So at this point, Madam Secretary, do we have any comments from the public at all in any type of device?
No, we do not.
All right, excellent. So that being said, I think we are pretty close to adjournment, unless there's any other comments from you, Tom, or Alan, or Veronica. If not, all right, thank you, and thank you, Madam City Manager, for listening in as well. This is an important conversation. Look forward to the next meeting, and thank you very much, all involved. And we will until next time. Thank you.